This is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, coming in live from the beach in Ambergris Key in Belize. And I'm here with a person I really respect and admire, and he's been on Anarchast before, Paul Rosenberg, and he's one of the founders of Crypto Hippie, and he's definitely a real jewel for us anarchists as far as a historian. I don't know anyone who knows more about true history than Paul, so I was really happy to see Paul, and I really wanted to get him on as well, because last time we had an interview was over the internet, and this is much better to have it in person. And the only thing I forgot was my mic cables, so we're going to have to actually just hold our microphone like this. I hope you can excuse that transgression, but I'm sure the information you're going to hear about is well worth it. So thanks for being with us, Paul.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
So what should we talk about? You know so much. We were talking the other night about Christianity. And obviously this is not about religion. We're not going to talk about religion, but there's a whole history of it that is also tied in somewhat with anarchism. And many people have sort of forgotten much of that. And I'm sure, Paul, you can give us some background on what you see about Christianity and anarchism and their ties.
Oh, glad to. First of all, really Christianity and Judaism, if you go back, they really are anarchist religions. They're outsider anarchist religions. I guess I'll just begin at the beginning. Let's start with Abraham. The real contribution, almost nobody knows this, the real contribution of Abraham or the Hebrews of his era was not monotheism, but it was the separation of spirituality into an individual exercise rather than a collective enterprise. If you look at the religions of the ancient world, everything from the Sumerians to the Romans, it was a collective endeavor. The way to explain it best was the God of the Hebrews was a God of individual souls, not the God of a territory or not the God of a particular ethnic group. There are certain little strains that come and go. You can see it in the Bible where there's some of this collective stuff going on, but the real movement was away from that, and it was of Abraham and the people of that era. We can't really prove Abraham actually existed.
Can we prove Jesus even existed?
There's very good proof that Jesus existed. His brother was quite well known at the time. Usually you'll see him in documents under the name of James the Just. He particularly shows up in Josephus and a few other things. We certainly know that there were very committed Christians. In the 50s AD, there's a letter from Pliny the Younger to one of the emperors in about, I think it's 110 AD, saying, what do I do with these people? Do I threaten them? What do I do? And the interesting thing about it is they were calling them atheists, because they wouldn't give the required offering to the emperor. They didn't believe in the gods, so they were calling them atheists, and they tended to blame them for whatever went wrong.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but anyhow, there's a lot to cover. I'll move on to the next step. The next real thing that stands out for anarchy is this group of people, the Hebrews, end up coming out of Egypt at one point, or in any event coming into Canaan. There was no king. Abraham was just a group of guys. There was really no group. It was a family. And by the time that they're coming out of Egypt or coming into Canaan, it's a large group, but there is no king. Moses added priests, but there was no king. There were just a bunch of tribes. And for several hundred years, they lived that way. And this was during a period of time that most historians call the Dark Ages of the Greeks, from roughly 1200 to 800 BC.
So the Dark Ages was when they didn't have a king.
Yeah, that's right. And it's the same thing with the Dark Ages of Europe, was a breakdown in centralized power. It really wasn't dark the way people said. There were a lot of things going on. People were building things. They weren't building monuments to rulers, but they were building houses and barns and farming and things like that. Yeah, productive things. So anyhow, so they have no king for quite some period of time. It's called the period of the judges. We don't have to go through the details. Finally, a group of them come to the man who was the judge of those days, who was the most respected man of those days, named Samuel. And they come to him and say, Samuel, we want a king like the other nations we see around here. And he says,
trendy.
He was trendy, yes. And he said, no, you don't want a king. He's going to tax you. He's going to take your sons and send them into war to die. You don't want a king. This is a bad idea. And they keep coming back saying, no, we want a king. We want to be like the other guys. And so Samuel goes to God, and he prays to God. What do I tell him? He says, go ahead, Samuel, give it to him. He says, they haven't rejected you, they've rejected me. So, yeah, which is a very strong statement.
Yes.
He says, they haven't rejected you, they've rejected me. Give it to them.
So the state is the opposite of God.
Yes.
Yes.
And this is out of God's mouth. Or through Samuel. Yeah, through Samuel. I'm taking the context, as it is. So they do this, and of course he sets up, finds the biggest, strongest guy in the country.
That's what you need for a government.
That's what you need for the necessary fear. So he takes the biggest, strongest guy, said he was a head taller than everyone else, named Saul. And Saul goes in, and he does the usual kingly things, and, kills and gets people killed and all that sort of stuff. And then God replaces him with a young kid who we found who had a good heart in him, named David. And
David and Goliath?
This is that David from David and Goliath, yes. Okay. And the interesting thing about this guy, this was the very best guy that God Almighty could find. And he got corrupted by power too. He ended up killing one of his lead guys because he thought his wife was hot. That's in modern terms, that's the way we'd put it. And of course, a prophet comes to him and tells him, and he was very sorry afterward and everything else. He was basically a good, decent human being, but the position of being king corrupts you no matter who you are. This guy was handpicked by God Almighty, and he still got corrupted by power. So, what does that tell you? And then we'll jump forward, and only a couple more steps now.
Take your time. This is very interesting.
Then we jump forward to Jesus, and who was an itinerant rabbi.
This was all before Jesus.
This is all before Jesus. Okay. This is all, and these are core documents of both Judaism and Christianity.
And Islam as well? Are they all related?
Islam came later.
Okay.
And
you can maybe go into that later, but
okay,
keep going with what you're saying.
Okay, so we fast forward another 1,000 years here of all kinds of messiness in between, as usual. And here's this itinerant rabbi, and he's telling everybody to come out, leave everything behind. Go, let the dead bury their dead, come with me. Come, let's be a new thing, let's do something new. And one of the interesting passages, it's for those who care about such things, it's Luke chapter 4. Jesus is in the wilderness before he really starts doing his thing, and it says that he was tempted by the devil, and the devil says to him, all the kingdoms of the world are mine, and all the glory of them. I own them, and I give them to whoever I want. If you will come and worship me, I'll give them to you. And the interesting thing is, Jesus accepted the statement as if it were true. He answers and said, no, I won't do that. I'm not going to tempt God. But he treated the statement as if it was a true statement.
Well, let me ask you one thing, because I'm no Bible expert at all. But by the way, I want to interject for 1 second. We're not talking here about religion. What we're talking about is how the religion that many people today say they believe in has been twisted, and what the real roots of that religion were. And so this is my question: is what is the Bible? It was just a bunch of guys writing stories?
You ask easy questions. That's a very good question. The Bible is a collection of a whole bunch of different things. We really don't know when it was first written down. The first good copies that we can really say we can point to at 600 BC. Something like that.
I didn't know it was that early.
Yeah, and how much further back, we don't know. Okay. The story of Noah and the Ark, for example, goes back to at least 2500 BC.
Wow.
Yeah, it's in a Sumerian book called the tablet called the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it's the story of Noah. He has a different name to the Sumerians, but it's essentially the story of Noah. So we don't know exactly where the first ones came from, but by about 600 BC, we're pretty sure that the Hebrew Bible that we have was mostly complete. A few things were added afterwards. The New Testament was assembled in, let's call it 100 AD to 150 AD. It's really it's a lot fuzzy, because Christians were kind of an underground group. They weren't, there were no churches that we think of. The word for church in the Old and the Greek means assembly. It means a group of people getting together. That's all.
So before that, was there religion, or were people just not thinking that way, and then they... Do you understand my question?
I think I do. There were lots of religions.
Oh, okay.
There were lots of religion. There was paganism all through Greece and Rome, which was that era.
What is paganism? I don't understand the word.
Yeah, people use it badly.
All words, anarchy.
Right. There are very few words that are ruined worse than anarchy.
Liberals.
Right. Paganism was a polytheistic religion. They believed in multiple gods. They tended to be gods of a certain area, a god of this hill, god of this body of water, or a god of a certain thing. The Romans had all kinds of gods for doorknobs. I mean, I'm not kidding. They had gods for everything. But it was a very open system. You could worship whatever god you wanted. The problem the Romans had with the Jews first and then the Christians, and the Jews and Christians were the same at the beginning. Christianity was just a sect of Judaism, and for 100 years or more. But the problem they had with them, they didn't care if they worshiped their God. They just wanted them to say something nice about the emperor too, and add a little, throw a little incense in the thing for the emperor, and it was considered necessary, because if everybody who was in Rome didn't pay at least some respect to the gods and religion of Rome, then the gods wouldn't help them anymore. It was very transactional. You prayed to the god because you wanted him to give you something.
Sort of like government.
Yeah, sort of like, a lot like government, yes. So paganism was actually a very open, decent, system in a lot of ways. People talk, pagans are crazy, but it wasn't like that. They were thoughtful people. Some of the later, I don't know if to call it religion, philosophy, Stoicism, Cynicism, they were very close to Christianity. There's arguments that Epictetus, who was a great Stoic philosopher, might have secretly been a Christian, because what he was saying was so very close to Christianity, and his was about maybe 50 AD. So it was right at the same time Christianity was going on. But in any event, Christianity really is an anarchist religion at its base. They were meeting in beaches. They were meeting in somebody's living room. They were meeting, in an apartment above. One of the famous ones is, we meet in an apartment above the baths of Timothy in Rome. That's the kind of things they did. They were outsiders, and they were not anti-state. To them, the state was a non-entity. It was just,
it should be.
Right.
It's a artificial construct.
Right. These guys were really great at this, because one of the problems that anarchists do now that really we shouldn't. I understand why we end up doing it. We complain about the state. The state this, the state this, they stink, they're imposing this on us. And it's legitimate to complain about, because they're real impositions. But these guys, the state is evil. It's out there, it belongs to the devil. We don't have anything to do with it. We do our thing, and we're building our new world.
Wow. Very, very interesting. And this is sort of the reason I want to talk more about this, because I see this as an opportunity for us anarchists, because there's so many people in the world today who call themselves Christians and Catholics. And maybe you can answer this question, and I'll ask it a little bit later or whatever. what's the difference between a Christian and a Catholic? I don't even understand those differentials. But the reason that I think this is interesting for us anarchists, for people who believe in peace and love and voluntary transactions, and don't believe in the collective as being something. We just talked about that. A government is an artificial construct. It's an idea that's gone very wrong. And so this is why I think we really have an opportunity here. If we can wake up to the ideas that you're talking about, and these are you can look up probably almost everything that Paul said, and I don't know where you get all your information, because this stuff is not just out there as far as I've seen. And I'll ask you that as well. Let's start with, are Christians and Catholics different? Easy question.
You always ask these. Right now, Christianity technically is anybody who believes in Christ in any way, including Mormons, including Catholics.
That includes Mormons?
Well, the specialists argue about these things, and people fight about these things all the time.
That's why I'm so confused. There's so much talk and so many different viewpoints, and I'm sure we're going to have I'm sure we're going to have on the comments below a ton of religious people saying that's wrong, this is wrong. Like, there's so much information and misinformation that it's very hard to cull through it all.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem. It's hard. I actually, before we're done, I want to answer the usual religious guy's complaint about everything I've said so far. But Catholicism is the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, and it really began 300-something AD, and there were several different types of Christianity then, but the Roman Empire took it over, and the Roman Empires step by step said, thou shalt worship no other. And they took over Christianity. They never did it perfectly. They never did it completely. There were always problems. There were always people running away so they could practice their version of Christianity where they, the way they wanted to. But they more or less took it over, and then in about, anything from the 1300s to the 1500s, a lot of people said, no, we don't like the way you're doing it, and that became the Protestant Reformation, and that's when that broke off.
Okay, so my mother is Protestant. I don't even know what that is. So what is a Protestant?
They're the people who protested against...
Oh, they're protesters.
That's right. They protested against Rome, and generally from about 1300
the Roman government or the Christian religion?
The Roman Catholic Church.
Okay. Right. Oh, so they don't believe in the Pope and that kind of stuff.
Right. Protestants do not believe in the Pope. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know any of this stuff.
Okay. Let me go through the one usual, that you'll get in your comments. People are going to say, "What about Romans 13?" which is one particular chapter and one particular letter in the New Testament. Okay, it's a book of Romans written by Saul of Tarsus, usually known as St. Paul. And he wrote this book to the people in Rome that were believers in Christ, believers in the Messiah. Christ just means Messiah.
Okay.
Same, just a word in a different language.
I didn't know that.
Same thing. So there were this group of people in Rome that believed in Jesus as the Messiah, and he wrote a letter to them. Now, there's this one chapter of it.
And who wrote it? St. Paul?
St. Paul.
Okay.
And there's this one chapter in it when he says, every soul should be subject to the higher powers. For there is no power except of God, and so on and so forth. And people take this to mean that you must obey the government, you must obey a policeman, you must do all this. So there are actually three particular problems with this. I'll try
to name three.
First is, I'll give you the one that won't satisfy people. I'll give you that one first. It's really, according to a number of specialists in it, Romans 13 was written afterwards and added in. Okay. I haven't examined the original Greek texts myself to really be able to tell you. But I know that there are a number of people who are specialists in such things that are good at it that really question whether Romans should have ended after chapter 12 verse 2. There's a section that they think was added before the final credits, if you will, which is quite possible.
Well, I find it funny, particularly there's different Bibles. There's the King James Bible, like I'm going to start my own Bible, Jeff Berwick Bible.
Thomas Jefferson did. Kind of. But these are all translations of the Greek, or in a couple cases, translations of the Latin. Okay, but it was all written in Greek. Or perhaps some of it initially was written in a variant of Hebrew, but almost all of it was Greek.
So the Bible was written mostly in Greek originally?
The New Testament was all Greek. The Old Testament was all Hebrew. With there's a couple minor exceptions, but they're not worth talking about. Okay.
I didn't know any of this.
Yeah. So anyhow, the other issue with this, the big issue, I'll just jump to the end, with Romans 13 is, if you believe that the way they say it is, then the Germans were right. Every German should have obeyed Hitler. Every guy in the USSR should have obeyed Stalin and killed more people. The minions of Chairman Mao were right to murder 50 or however many million people in there.
Yeah, the teenage people in a room in Virginia should continue drone bombing people around the world.
Precisely. So if that's the case, then evil monsters should be obeyed just the same as your favorite ruler.
And why should they be obeyed? Because how do they become authorities?
The text doesn't specify. It just says if they're a ruler, according to the way some people interpret it, you should obey them. Problem is that the guys in the New Testament, Jesus, the people who wrote Paul, who wrote that section, Peter, all of them, none of them obeyed the authorities. They all defied the authorities and said, essentially, screw you, we're not going to do it. And one famous thing, they're coming at Peter and John, who are two of Jesus' first friends and best friends. And they said, you can't do this, legitimate authorities, Jewish religious authorities. You can't do this, you must not. He says, we're going to obey God rather than men. Another way, screw you. We're not going to do it. So, if that interpretation of Romans 13 is right, then you got to get rid of St. Peter, you got to get rid of John, you got to get rid of almost all of the apostles. At least we don't have full information on everybody, so it just doesn't hold. It's a false. It's either a part that was added later, or it's a false interpretation. Because if you do that, the text contradicts itself, and God becomes a monster.
Well, I'm already predicting we're going to have the most comments on this video that we've ever had. Mostly fairly insane religious type people. But let me ask you another question. And I've never really looked into the religious stuff because it never really made sense to me. But I do really like how you look at it and your perspective on what you think is the truth, which I think is a much better truth, or much more realistic than what a lot of the typical religious pastors and priests do today. Let me ask you, because I read Da Vinci Code, and I found it very fascinating. Have you read it?
I saw the movie, I didn't read the book.
Well, the movie sucked. So yeah, the book's great actually. It's a page turner. It's a page turner, but it brought up so many things that I'd never heard before. And one of them, just as an example, is that the original Christian idea, Jesus thing, was mostly about his wife Magdalene. Do you know? Tell me about this. I don't know anything about it. I'm interested though.
Yeah, that is pretty much flatly false.
Okay.
There was a lady named Mary of Magdala, and they called her the Magdalene because she was from this place called Magdala. And everything else is storytelling. She was, as best anyone can tell, anyway, she was not a hooker. She was not, she was a young lady.
Well, I would say all women are hookers in one extent or another, and so all men are as well. We're always trading things for different things we want, and sexuality is just a part of our lives. I had a question. I just lost my train of thought about... Oh, that's what I was thinking. The one part that interested me, because I read some things, but not a lot of things, nothing like you. And I heard that one approach was that a lot of the Bible kind of stuff was more about women. And I like that, because the reason why I've never really gone anywhere near religion is, so there's this white male What a coincidence. You know, if it was a little Chinese girl or something who was God, I'd be like, well, maybe that's possible. Like, it's just too obvious. It's like, is there anything to that? And another thing I would say is I've also heard that, you know, they call Jesus the Son. And to me, if we're going to worship anything, and worship's a funny word too, yes, and we can go into that, or we don't have to, but if we were going to, if I had to worship one thing for my life, it would be the Son, the actual Son. Without that, we definitely don't have much life. Do you have any comments on what I've just said?
Oh boy.
Too many?
Yeah, too many.
Go ahead. This is really interesting. We can go on for a while. I'm
Actually, give me your first part again.
About was there more to?
Oh, the female side. Okay, let's do this. It's a legitimate issue. The ancient world was not particularly great to women. The thing is, but people don't. And let me say it this way. Inside the home, women are women and men are men. And no matter where you go in history, pretty much people are people. So there were in Greece, I mean, Greece was the most misogynistic culture I can think of. Women weren't even to be seen, ideally. And, I mean, they were, you know, Greece was bad that way. But in real life, now that was the official line, but in real life, a lot of Greeks had warm family relationships. You can see from some of the grave markers that are very tender remembrances of man for his wonderful wife who had died. And so in real life, a lot of the legal things aren't really practiced in the home. They're just for show, for, you know, puffery, where the big,
most
strong...
religion is, really.
A lot of things are that way.
That's true.
So, but one of the interesting things about Judaism and Christianity is that they always had prophetesses. And they had women who knew God, and women who did special things, and women who did things that no men did.
Heard of them.
Oh gosh, yes. There's a couple different cases where a woman was called on and she killed the monster who was attacking the land and killing everybody. There's famous cases of that, and several stories of women like that. Queen Esther is the one that everybody remembers, who went to Bible school or went to, you know, Sunday school. She saved the Jews, you know, underneath the Persians. Or was it? Yeah, it was the Persians at that time.
Now, was that real, or is that just a story?
So far as we know, it's a story, but it is correct in terms of time and place and what went on. So we don't know, but it could be true in that it is historically accurate for the time and place. But there were always these special women in Judaism and Christianity. There were some cases of that underneath some of the pagan things. Some of the shrines had priestesses. There were some very interesting groups in southern Italy called the Sibyls. But Christianity more so. If you read at the end of all the letters that Paul writes, he says, oh, you know, make sure you greet so-and-so and greet so-and-so, because these people didn't see each other very often. And there were lots and lots of women named who he said were very, very important. So there was quite a bit of it in those days, but not in terms of worshiping the Divine Mother sort of thing. Mm-hmm. That's something that people try to add, but it really wasn't there like that.
Interesting. And what was my second question? Do you remember? Oh, about the sun.
Oh, worshiping the sun.
Do you think Jesus, the sun, is actually a metaphor for the real sun?
No, I don't think so. People did use that as an example, but that came second rather than first. And the interesting thing about worshiping the sun is, according to the Bible itself, you're not supposed to worship Jesus. And there's in
the actual Bible it says that.
In the actual Bible, it never says worship Jesus. It also says worship my Father.
Oh, okay.
Pray to my Father who's in secret. It never says pray to me.
Interesting.
I mean, there's one place where it says you'll ask me something, but there's an interesting passage at the end of the book of Revelation where this great being stands there, and John falls down to worship him, and he picks him up. And he says, you don't worship me, you worship God. And that's it. Now, people have done other things over the years, and they've found, theological engineering to find some way to take a text and make it mean what they want it to mean.
Right.
But the actual Bible itself, you're not supposed to worship Jesus personally.
Well, I know in the comments there's going to be so many people who read the Bible and they take it their own way, of course.
Right.
Is there a way to differentiate between what is actually real and what you actually, your perspective on it? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, what you're asking is how do we find out what really was real and what really was said and what was just interpretation after the fact? There's several things you have to do, and there's a certain amount of judgment involved, because it's not just black and white. Paul disagrees with James, for example, quite strongly. Yeah, very much so.
I actually heard there's one of those apostles, he was a real bastard. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I'm not sure which one.
Okay.
They were all tough guys. These had to be tough guys to do what they did.
Well, the reason I say is because Doug Casey said to me the other day that, because I asked him about it, because I'm curious. I'm just curious. I want to find out what's real and what's not. And he said, I think it was Paul, I think he said, was sort of like a prick. And he kind of bent it his way. Do you know what have you heard this before?
I've heard things like this.
Okay.
Paul was a tough guy. Like I say, they all were. I mean, these guys they were risking their life, and they were getting on boats.
Just like us.
A lot like anarchists, yes. And they were, getting on boats and sailing places where, this is 2,000 years ago. This wasn't a trivial.
They were going to fall off the end of the earth.
Well, no, they knew they knew the world was round.
Oh, okay.
They knew it was a sphere. That was pretty well known. But it was a risky endeavor to do this.
I've sailed it. I've sunk a sailboat before.
Yes, you did, didn't you?
It's definitely not easy.
Right. So these
I couldn't imagine without GPS.
And these guys were just out there sailing. So it was a very risky endeavor. They had to be tough guys. Paul was beaten several times by professionals, and in jail and all sorts of stuff. So he was a tough guy, and he said some things about women that I wouldn't say. And he wasn't cruel to them directly, but he said a woman shouldn't do this and a woman shouldn't do this. But then he goes on and says, but we have no rule about that. So I would like to question him in person to know to clarify some of these meanings.
Well, that brings up another thing. I always say, if I could bring back a few people, like bring them back to life, I'd bring back Jesus to show him what's happened to his whole idea, and I'd bring back Thomas Jefferson, because he had a lot of ideas about his republic that haven't gone awry. Those are the two. Are there any others you would like to bring back?
Oh boy, lots of them. Those were a good first two, though. Those were a real good first two. I'll give you one name that a guy I'd love to spend some time with. Almost nobody knows of him. His name was Peter Abelard, and he was a bright young guy in roughly 1100 AD, just as Western civilization is really getting firm, but it's still a primitive time compared to us. This guy wanted to learn, and he left his home in northeastern France, as I recall, at 16, maybe 15. And he gets up and walks across and goes town to town to try to find anybody who can teach him something. And he finds Aristotle, and he's in love with Aristotle, and he makes his way to Paris and gets into there are a couple little schools that existed. They weren't much like anything we would recognize, but there was a place where there actually was a teacher. There were 3 teachers in Paris. That was it. And he found one of these, and of course developed his own mind quite well, and then of course mind.
Oh, mind.
And then, of course, fell out with the teacher and got kicked out, fell in love with some woman at this point, which, for a lot of medieval reasons that I probably won't take time to explain, made problems. He was attacked. He was mutilated, really. Went out into the countryside and just found a spot and just kind of had a hut where he would teach thousands and thousands of people walked across France in 1100 AD to hear somebody teach. It was one of the moments when humanity woke up.
Wow.
And it wasn't just him, there were others from him. That's actually the very first origins of what became the University of Paris some years later. And Peter Abelard is one of the guys I would pick.
Wow. So many things you've said I've never heard before, and I'm sure many people haven't heard before. And it's kind of sad that, you know, so many of these things get warped over time and used by people for their own devices, and we lose the actual, many people do. Hopefully we can bring this back thanks to the internet. I believe what you're saying is true, because I know Paul, and I know he does like real research, and he's not just like reading some newspaper article and talking, you know, parroting their views or anything like that. This is a real searcher of truth. And please let us know on YouTube if you'd like to have Paul back on, because we could obviously talk for days, weeks, or months with Paul. Just amazing. Just so you know as well, he writes The Free Man's Perspective. What's the website?
www.freemansperspective.com, just the way it sounds.
And it's not your typical newsletter, because it's mostly about philosophy and history. How would you describe the newsletter?
Wow. We really take a look at the important things of life, history, philosophy. The important thing, the thing that is interesting about the newsletter is a view from outside. It's a view from outside the usual, outside of the matrix. And it's the view, and it's wonderful because I pick up all these things. It's like cheating, because there's all these things that everybody's had this kind of state-mindedness for all these years. They missed all the good things. I did a newsletter a month ago on the economics of rulership. Nobody, as far as I can find anywhere, ever took a look of government as a business. What's their income? What are their expenses? How does it work? It's a fascinating subject. I can't find anybody who ever did it ever. So I did an issue on it. So it's almost, you know, when you really step out and start, there's all these wonderful things. It's like I'm cheating. It's just sitting there waiting for me to pick it up.
Yeah, I feel like I'm cheating sometimes too, because obviously what we're talking about isn't stuff we created. It's stuff that we've just discovered through trying to find the truth. And Doug Casey actually said recently, it's like he's getting, like, I've been saying the same thing for 40 years, and I know that a lot of the things he says didn't just come from him. Of course, we put our own perspective on it. We can bring it different light on things, but we're just building on the growth of humanity. And isn't it a beautiful thing, the growth of humanity? Although, at this moment in time, with statism and a lot of the really religious people who have misconstrued so many things, it seems fairly... There's so many ways you can look at life. Now, we're sitting here on a beach, and we often do, and I see you at many different places, and we get around, and we have fun, and we live quite free, because we've... tried to live that way, and we found ways to get around many of these status systems, including crypto hippie, obviously. And no, it's just fascinating. And do you have any words on the growth of humanity? What's your view for the next, as long as you're going to be alive? Do you have hope that these sort of ideas, these beautiful ideas, and truth, even if they're not beautiful, they are truth, will continue to expand? Or do you think we're headed towards, you know, they call it a dark period? That would actually be a good period in your estimation. I agree with that. But do you think we're headed towards better times or worse times as humanity?
We have a very difficult passage right in front of us. You know, government power is at a peak. And the real issue is it's not just peak government power, but it's peak obedience. People are trained to obey. And that's really the root of the whole thing. So we have a real, you know, we have internet. The internet was our great surge, was our great great thing that happened in our time. It's been so good and so wonderful. But now it has been reclaimed. It's been recaptured. It's now a surveillance web. It's turning into a manipulation web. So we've kind of lost that. It still remains. There's still things we can do, but it's turning into more of a problem. So we've had that.
You see the internet as more of a problem now than a solution?
Yeah, for the sake of they record everything, they have everything, and they're finishing up now the protocols for what people call the internet kill switch, and they will be able to shut down troublemakers before too many years.
Us?
Yeah, people who do the kind of things we do.
So you believe that? Because I'm quite optimistic. I think that people are awakening very quickly right now. That's my opinion, is that we'll get to an awakening before the statists, the collectivists, the people who believe in a state, can shut us down. That's my belief. So you don't believe that?
I don't believe that in concerning the internet in its current incarnation. I believe it in general. A lot of people are waking up now. I like to tell the story that when I began with the freedom people, the objectivists, the whomever, the libertarians, with freedom people, not too many decades ago, it was really pretty much just a few overeducated guys on, the East Coast and the West Coast and a few scattered in between. Now it's all over the place. You got guys in Denton, Texas, in, Topeka, Kansas, all in little towns all over who get it, who really get it. So things are going very good in that way. Again, we see the daily impositions, we see the drone strikes and all those sorts of things, and it depresses us, and for just cause. If we can make it through this next passage, however many years it is, the state is really at a peak, and they can't sustain what they do for much longer. The welfare state is broke. Once they can't provide for everybody anymore, a lot of those people are going to withdraw their legitimacy, withdraw their consent. They're going to start speaking against the state, and there's people like us and like all of the other libertarians and anarchists and people that understand and have something to say, and that begins to spread too. Once that kind of mindset breaks, that's a difficult thing for people. It takes some time, but we're in a good shape.
Yeah, I could talk for hours with Paula. I'm going to ask another question because I'm so interested. I never leave unenlightened from meeting you anywhere. My general take, I just look at the world. I try to think rationally. I try to look at all the evidence. My general take is that humanity is evolving, and I want to get your perspective on this. That you think about even World War II and all that stuff. I don't think people would do that today. Just going in and just napalming other people and flamethrowers, all the crazy stuff that happened. And maybe it's because of the internet. Maybe I'm not sure what it is. Do you see humanity as being in an evolution of mindset that could potentially lead to a much better world?
In general, yes. I mean, the question is, what do you mean by evolution? Let's just leave that alone. Okay, let's take it in whatever.
I don't mean it in the school meaning of evolution or Darwin or anything like that. I mean as a rising of, I wouldn't even know how to explain it, intelligence or awareness.
Yeah, we're definitely over the last however many years, decades, centuries, things are going upward. People understand more. People complain about things more than they used to. I'm not a fan of complaints, but people wouldn't accept a lot of things now that happened in the past. Now they're running to the state to fix them a lot of times, which is sometimes the point of the exercise. But people know more. They're learning more. And the thing is about our position is, the more people know of real truth, the more they come to our position. Mm-hmm. Because it's a moral position, it's supported by economics and law and philosophy and psychology and medicine and everything else. All of it kind of comes and coalesces in our direction. So the more real knowledge there is, the more people improve themselves, the more they come our way.
Very well said, and we should end it there. Paul Rosenberg, if you enjoyed hearing what he has to say, definitely subscribe to the Freeman's Perspective. How much is it per year?
Right now it's $99 a year.
Well worth the money. He just says things, and he's not just saying them. He's researched and found information that is just generally not out there. And turn off your TV and listen more to people like Paul Rosenberg. And this has been Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet, from the beach in Ambergris Key. I always say K because I'm very visual. But I always used to call Yosemite Sam Yosemite Sam. And I always used to call Keynes Keynes. You know, I read more than I talk, so that's why I call this Ambergris K. But it's Ambergris Key, I believe, is the correct pronunciation. Although there is no correct of anything, you have to make up your own mind what is correct. But yeah, this is Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.